What's the story 100 years in the making? A century-old time capsule now being opened up in South Dakota.
During the demolition of an old Chicago church, a small metal box from 1889 was found sealed deep within its walls. No one knew what waited inside until experts carefully opened it, and what they uncovered was far more emotional and haunting than anyone imagined. Join us as we uncover the haunting mystery hidden for over a century beneath Chicago's stones. The Silent Message from 1889. In 1889, the city of Chicago was pulsing with growth and ambition. The Great Fire of 1871 still shaped how people thought about building and rebuilding. New neighborhoods rose, churches were founded, immigrant communities found roots, and stone and mortar held ambitious dreams. In one corner of Humboldt Park, a congregation built St. Paul Evangelical Lutheran Church, laying a foundation not just on earth, but in hope. It was in that very year they placed a sealed box deep in the limestone of a cornerstone, embedding within it a piece of 1889 meant for those far in the future to find. Who might have organized this? It would almost certainly have been the church leaders, the pastor or elders, alongside prominent members of their congregation. In that era, when town and church were intertwined, those who raised funds or donated land often wanted their names to last. They would decide which newspapers, religious pamphlets, or local documents to include. Often they would hold a small ceremony laying the cornerstone, offering prayers, speeches, and then slipping the box into the hollowed stone. On that day in 1889, proud voices might have spoken of faith, legacy, and connection between their generation and the distant tomorrow. At the time, placing a box in the very heart of a building's foundation was a kind of ritual because people in the late 19th century took legacy seriously. They believed that memory could outlast flesh, that a future generation might open this quiet chamber and hear voices from their past. The contents, like newspapers, religious writings, and local documents, were carefully selected to represent daily life, faith, and identity. Sometimes inscriptions were cut on metal plates. The year, the names of leaders, instructions like "to be opened in the year 2000," and dedicatory words. Even if the box was meant to lie untouched, those words whispered across time. Decades passed, and the church stood firm. It weathered storms, changes in congregation, war, urban shifts. Houses and streets grew around it. Over time, perhaps the memory of that box faded. Renovations, expansions, or repairs may have masked the corner where it rested. The stone may have been buried behind layers of masonry, hidden during refacing, or overlooked during maintenance. The city's constant churn meant that many would walk past that place without ever knowing a relic slept inside. Time is unkind to buried things. Moisture seeps, metal corrodes, wood rots, and paper turns brittle. The box could have been squeezed by shifting foundations, attacked by rust, or torn by small fractures in the stone. Even the act of expanding or reinforcing the building might stress the area around the capsule. In some churches, renovations to foundations unintentionally break into such hidden cavities without awareness. Over a century, subtle movements in earth, changes in structural engineering, and the weight of new construction can distort once perfect stonework. The very stone that concealed the capsule might have cracked. The mortar could have changed composition. Yet, the passage of time also builds suspense. The fact that this capsule lay hidden makes it feel more alive when rediscovered. What was once a deliberate offering becomes a kind of ghostly whisper from 1889, waiting silent in darkness until the hammer of demolition or the careful tapping of archaeologists breaks the seal. And their first expression was so massive and intriguing, the gentle unveiling of a century-old secret. They handled the box like a tiny sleeping thing that had been awake for a very long time. Before anyone touched it, people who know how to care for old things stepped forward and slowed everything down. They did not rip the lid off or pry at it with dirty hands. Instead, they treated the find like a small museum treasure, something to be looked at gently, measured, and watched before it was opened. First, they scanned the box without breaking it. Machines that make pictures through metal showed what might be inside, so the team could plan how to open it without causing surprise damage. This careful peek helped them guess whether paper, cloth, or metal objects waited inside and where each item sat. People who find time capsules often use this kind of imaging so they do not tear fragile things by accident. After the scans, Every person who reached toward the capsule wore gloves. Oils from bare fingers can hurt old paper and faded ink, so cotton or nitrile gloves were used to keep everything safe. The box was moved into a calm room with steady temperature and the right amount of moisture in the air, because sudden changes can make brittle pages shatter like dry leaves. The team set up tiny tools, small drills and picks to remove old solder or rust without crushing the contents, and soft brushes and gentle vacuum suction to take away dust and bits without touching the papers too roughly. Conservators sometimes use micro-instruments under a magnifying glass to freeze stuck pages one by one, with patience instead of force. When someone finally loosened the lid, the room held its breath. A thin, old smell came out, the scent of paper that has slept for a century, of metal that has slept longer. It was not like the smell of a funeral or a curse. It was the scent of time itself. At that instant, air that had been trapped for decades whispered out. People heard a soft hiss, a tiny sigh like a held story finally released. That sound always makes hearts jump, because it means two things at once: a surprise and a risk. Will the paper crumble? Will the ink vanish in minutes? This question sits heavy in those moments. Inside, paper often looks like fragile cloth. The pages can be thin and browned, edges eaten by time. Ink can be faint or bloom into soft brown clouds. Sometimes metal fasteners have rusted into the paper, and pulling them can tear whole lines of writing. So conservators do not yank things free. They may use small drills to open the metal without bending it, then use vacuum suction that is gentle enough to lift dust, but careful enough to leave the paper intact. If a document is damp or stuck, experts sometimes use controlled drying methods, slow, careful techniques that draw out water without warping the page. These are not magic tricks. They are learned methods that ask time to be kind for a little longer. Opening a capsule is also a race against a fragile clock. Once the seal is broken, items meet air and begin to change. Conservators work fast, but calmly. They photograph every step so the story of how each item looked before and after is preserved. They place each find in safe folders and boxes with materials that will not harm them. If a letter looks like it will fall to pieces the moment it is touched, a conservator may stabilize it with a clear, thin support or consider freeze-drying to save ink that would otherwise run. These choices are careful and often hard because saving one thing might mean losing another. Sometimes, the worst fears come true. In one Chicago discovery, a handwritten note fell apart when it met the open air. It could not be saved in full. That moment is heavy. Everyone who helped wanted to keep the voice from the past whole, but age and chemistry had already decided most of its fate. Still, other items, brittle newspapers and printed pages, sometimes survive well enough to be read and shared. And this was exactly how it was in the 1889 case. So the first impressions are always two things at once: a small celebration and a quiet worry. The tools, the gentle hands, the machines that see through metal, and the slow breathing of experts all work to turn a sealed, sleeping thing into a story we can hold. When the lid lifts, 100 years of silence steps into the light, and the people there must be ready, careful, kind, and quick to listen and to keep what can be kept. So keep watching to find out what was discovered years back. Discovering the 1889 time capsule. Although there were other archaeologists involved, Eric Nordstrom was the loudly heard name behind the discovery. Years back, Eric Nordstrom came across something truly amazing, and it was the two hidden treasures from over a century ago. Each time capsule he found has left him filled with mixed emotions. On one hand, he was thrilled by the discovery, but on the other, he can't shake the feeling that maybe he isn't the one meant to uncover them. There's a quiet sense of guilt that follows each find, as if he's peeking into a private piece of history that wasn't meant for him. Eric wasn't just anyone stumbling upon these relics. He was an urban archaeologist with a passion for uncovering forgotten stories. Through his company, Urban Remains, based in Westtown, he rescues and gives new life to objects taken from old buildings. For nearly a decade, his work has led him to countless discoveries, and among them, he has already found around 12 time capsules. Yet no matter how many times it happens, the feeling never gets easier. His most recent discovery was tucked away inside a block of limestone, hidden within the wall of what used to be St. Paul Evangelical Lutheran Church in Humboldt Park. Pulling it out felt like touching the past itself, a small, sealed piece of another world, resting quietly until now. As he held it, a wave of wonder and responsibility washed over him. The thought in his mind was, should he really be the one to open it? It's moments like these that make his work both exciting and deeply emotional. Every time capsule he finds carries more than just old papers or trinkets. It carries stories, secrets, and memories frozen in time. And for Eric, each discovery is a gentle reminder that sometimes history finds us when we least expect it. When Eric Nordstrom carefully opened the small box, he couldn't believe what was inside. Tucked neatly within it was a copy of the Chicago Daily News, dated October 26, 1889, a fragile piece of history perfectly preserved through time. The yellowed pages told stories of a very different Chicago, one filled with drama and danger. One of the main reports spoke of skilled thieves who had broken into a steel vault at 42nd and Halsted Streets, managing to steal everything inside. The article described how the massive vault door had been left hanging loosely, surrounded by bits of metal and the shattered pieces of a broken lock. Another story on the same page talked about a legal battle between the Chicago Towing Company and the city itself. The disagreement was over $300 paid for tugboat licenses, a sum that might sound small today but was quite a fortune back then. Reading these old headlines was like stepping straight into the past, catching a glimpse of the city's struggles and daily life more than a century ago. The old gray building where Eric found this treasure, at 2733 West Hirsch Street, had once been St. Paul Evangelical Lutheran Church. Built in 1889 for $5,000, it had stood for generations, though by the time of its demolition it no longer looked like a church at all. In recent years, the space had even been used by a local arts group known as Young Camelot, a far cry from its sacred beginnings. Now, let's unveil how the discovery happened, how Eric discovered the time capsule. At 38 years old, Eric was on site the day the demolition team began tearing the structure down. As the heavy machines roared to life, he stood close by, scanning every corner for anything worth saving. He wasn't there just to watch a building fall. He was there to rescue pieces of history before they were lost forever. Anything he found could end up in his urban remains shop on West Grand Avenue or in his museum BLDG at East Illinois Street. Based on his years of experience at demolition sites, Eric had a strong feeling that the church might be hiding something special within its walls. He asked the crew to handle the archway at the entrance with extra care, convinced that a time capsule might be buried somewhere nearby. 2 large limestone blocks stood on either side of the doorway, and his instincts told him that the secret was hidden inside one of them. And once again, he was right, because when the stones were carefully examined, the past revealed itself in the most unexpected and beautiful way. When Eric Nordstrom finally reached the hidden compartment within the limestone, he found a small copper box resting quietly inside, untouched for more than 100 years. As he lifted the lid, he felt a wave of anticipation. Inside, time itself seemed frozen. Among the fragile contents was a Norwegian-language newspaper called Scandinavian, where someone long ago had circled a story about the construction of the church in blue pencil, a simple but touching gesture that connected the present to a moment from 1889. There was much more carefully placed inside the box. Eric uncovered an issue of the Daily Inter-Ocean, dated October 26, 1889, along with a Pittsburgh publication called The Workman, a copy of the Morning News from the same date, the Lutheran Observer, and another paper known as the Svenska Tribune. Each newspaper carried stories, ads, and glimpses of lives once lived, echoes from a Chicago that no longer exists. Tucked between the papers was a folded, handwritten letter, aged and fragile. But when Eric gently tried to unfold it, the paper crumbled to dust before his eyes. It was a heartbreaking moment. Whatever message the writer had hoped to send to the future was gone forever. He couldn't help but feel a deep sadness that someone, over a century ago, had taken the time to write a message for whoever would find this box, and now that voice had vanished into silence. This wasn't the first time he had experienced such an emotional discovery. Just a few months earlier, in March, he had uncovered another capsule at an old church on Adams Street near the United Center. That one contained 4 different versions of the Bible, each carefully placed inside, as if meant to protect the faith and memories of the congregation that once gathered there. Over the years, Eric has built a strong bond with the demolition crews he often works alongside. After a decade in salvage work, they know how much these discoveries mean to him. Many of them now contact him ahead of time when a historic building is about to come down, knowing he might want to preserve a piece of its story. Living in downtown Chicago, Eric has shifted much of his focus toward documenting the final moments of these buildings, capturing their beauty, their history, and their quiet decay through photographs and stories he shares on his blog, urbanremainschicago.com. For him, it's more than just collecting old objects. It's about honoring the past before it disappears completely. He often describes his work as documenting the final chapter of a building's life, a way to keep its memory alive even after the walls have fallen. And in those moments, as dust settles and silence returns, history speaks again, through the eyes of someone who refuses to let it be forgotten. Even with all the excitement that comes with uncovering these rare pieces of history, Eric Nordstrom can't help but feel a little disappointed. After finding so many time capsules buried beneath forgotten churches and old buildings, he had hoped that someone connected to those places might reach out, maybe a descendant of a church member or someone with a family tie to the stories hidden inside. But so far, no one has. Not a single message. Not one call from anyone saying they recognize the history he's uncovered. It's a quiet kind of sadness that lingers with each new discovery. Still, Eric's love for preserving the past hasn't faded. He has always believed that if someone with a real connection to one of the time capsules ever came forward, he would gladly hand it over without hesitation. To him, these artifacts don't belong in private hands. They belong to the stories and people they came from. Until that day arrives, the precious pieces he's uncovered are being safely kept in his museum, where they're protected and carefully documented. For now, he continues to share every detail on his website, where anyone curious about Chicago's lost history can explore what he's found. His passion for this work runs deep. It's more than just a job. It's a way of life. Each capsule, each fragment, feels like a conversation with the past, and he wants those stories to stay alive. He hopes to one day include these discoveries in a special exhibit, especially if he uncovers even more capsules along the way. For Eric, every artifact tells a piece of a forgotten story, and until someone steps forward to claim it, he'll keep those memories safe for everyone who still believes that history matters. Various reactions towards time capsules. When a sealed box from another century shows up, the first people to lean in are those who love old stories: museum workers, archivists, local historians, and sometimes family researchers. In the Humboldt Park find, a field archaeologist who rescues building pieces was the person who pulled the box free during demolition, and his reaction set the tone for what came next. The discovery did not feel like a cold news item. It felt like someone handing an old letter across time and asking gently, "Who will listen?" Archivists and curators treat things like that as both treasure and question. Their first move is to document everything and keep the object safe, because once an item meets modern air, it starts to change. City history centers and public libraries are the natural homes for that work. They bring cataloging systems, old newspapers, and city directories to the table so the tiny voices in the box can be read and placed into a larger story. The people who care for these finds know how images, notes, and program leaflets become pieces of a community puzzle that helps explain how people lived long ago. After the initial care, the real detective work begins. Researchers look through old city records, library collections, census rolls, and church registries to track the names, dates, and places that appear inside the capsule. They dig into newspapers from the same year and the decades after to see whether the people named showed up again in court reports, wedding announcements, obituaries, or business listings. Genealogy sites and local archives are used to follow family lines and to find living relatives who might hold memories or old papers that match the capsule's contents. This is careful, patient work that turns paper fragments into human stories. Hunters for family ties do not always succeed. In the Humboldt Park case, the rescuer who opened the box said he hoped someone connected to the old church or its members would reach out. but nobody came forward at first. That left the artifacts in the care of the Finders Museum, where they could be preserved and shown to anyone who wanted to study them. Sometimes no descendant can be located, or the families have moved away and the link to the place has faded. Even when no living relative is found, the items still speak for a neighborhood's past and let strangers feel the warm weight of someone else's ordinary life. Part of what makes these discoveries so emotional is how the tiny details line up with bigger local stories. A headline about a crime, a church notice circled in pencil, or an advertisement for a funeral home become clues that tie to cataloged events and citywide trends. Historians point out that time capsules are not neutral. What people chose to include shows what mattered to them, and that selection says as much about their hopes as their fears. When researchers connect the capsule's items to later events, like a family name that appears again in an obituary or a neighborhood that later endured hardship, the past feels unexpectedly close, like a voice that reaches forward. That closeness often brings strange, quiet moments. A name in a brittle program may match a grave marker found in cemetery records. A printed notice may foreshadow a change in the neighborhood that future newspapers then record. These links are seldom dramatic at first. They are small, human echoes that make people pause. For locals who still live near the old site, the objects can trigger memories passed down by grandparents or stories about the place that suddenly gain proof. For scholars, those connections open paths to fresh research and sometimes new exhibits that let the public touch a piece of the past. Emotion plays its part at every step. The archaeologist who found the box felt a mix of wonder and unease about opening it, and archivists feel the same responsibility when they decide how best to preserve a fragile note or paper. Families, if found, often respond with surprise and gratitude. Neighbors respond with nostalgia or curiosity. Scholars respond with questions about what the collection reveals about a community's values and identity. Even when no living connection is made, the items often end up as public objects that let strangers carry forward the memory of people who once built their lives around that church or street. However, these small discoveries matter because they remind us that history is made of ordinary people and quiet choices. Experts and locals both act as listeners and keepers, following paper trails and city records to turn fragments into faces and names into stories. When a capsule opens, the work that follows is less about finding treasure than about finding a place for those voices in today's world so they can be heard again. The time capsule's legacy and purpose. When a little box from long ago is opened, it feels like someone has reached across time and tapped us on the shoulder. Those folded pages and tiny objects are more than old things. They are short letters from people who breathe the same air and walk the same streets. People who put those boxes away wanted to be remembered. They wanted a piece of their ordinary day to live on for someone else to find. This is why communities put such boxes into the walls of buildings, beneath monuments, or under a cornerstone during a ceremony. It was a gentle promise that their moment would meet the future. Back then, sending a message forward felt important and hopeful. The practice of tucking items away for future eyes dates back a long time, even if the name we use now is newer. At big fairs and building ceremonies, people often place things in metal jars or small chests and close them with care. Sometimes they even wrote down the names of leaders or the date to make sure the story could be placed later in a larger memory. The idea was simple. Ordinary objects can tell extraordinary things about who we were and what we cared about. That small faith, a paper, a coin, or even a program, could speak across generations. But hope and reality live in tension. Many of those items face harsh odds. Metal rusts, glue dries out, paper turns thin and crumbly. Water and salt creep into sealed corners. Changes in a building, new walls, reworked foundations, or even the steady settling of earth can squeeze or break a hidden container. So while the gesture of saving something feels permanent in the moment, the materials themselves are fragile. That is why experts say a successful capsule needs a sturdy container, a safe place to keep it, and careful thought about what to put inside. Thoughtless choices or weak protections mean the message may not survive. When we call the discovery of such a box haunting, we usually do not mean ghosts. We mean that the past keeps knocking. The things found inside can echo worries and joys that sound close to home. A list of names, a church notice, or a child's scribble can feel like a voice asking whether we listened. The feeling is gentle at first, curiosity, wonder, and then it can deepen into something heavier. The ache that the writer never knew what would come next, or the sudden recognition that a worry they had long ago came true in ways they could not foresee. That emotional pull is what gives these objects power. They turn history into a person we might meet, rather than a dry page. There is also a lesson woven into that ache. People who pack these boxes often meant to have people in the next generation remember them. They packed the things that made their lives ordinary. Newspapers, coins, sermons, business cards. Those choices tell us what mattered to them then, which names they thought important, which events they read about, which beliefs comforted them. Sometimes those choices reveal blind spots too, worries they had, or ideas that later generations will judge differently. The time capsule becomes a mirror, showing both the pride and the limits of the people who made it. Today, when such a box is found, the modern answer is to treat it with careful science and deep respect. Conservators photograph every item, stabilize fragile papers, and store things in ways that slow decay. Digital copies are often made so the words survive, even if the paper does not. This twin approach, saving the real object and creating a durable digital record, is how we try to give the past a second chance to be heard. It is a quiet rescue operation that honors both the original promise and the reality that materials change. That double effort points to a larger idea about legacy. Preserving memory is both hopeful and humble. Hopeful because people believe their small acts matter, and humble because the future will always be different from what they imagined. The best we can do is listen carefully, keep what we can, and make faithful records so the voices are not lost. When a box from a long time ago is opened, it asks simple questions like, will we listen kindly? And will we pass those voices along with care? That gentle challenge is the real gift the past offers, not proof of immortality, but a chance to remember well. So, what do you think those people from 1889 truly wanted us to find in that hidden box? Could it be a warning, a hope, or just a quiet reminder that time never really forgets? Let's hear from you in the comments. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.